Welcome back to another edition of the Red Pill Christians podcast. It's me, Prax. I'm the owner of RPC and probably the most attractive guy here. We also have Matt, also known as Redirected, and Red Curious. Matt, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Matthew, or Redirected. I'm Praxology's mentor, discipler, and better looking older brother.
Red Curious here. As always, everybody mostly should know who I am at this point. The resident fugly mutt who is thinking way too much about everything and putting even more into practice.
Okay, so we have a lot of guys that come into the disciple cord. They're single. They have in their heart, they want to get married. They want to get a girlfriend. So they're going to lose weight. They're going to start lifting. How do we lead these guys when it comes to dating, getting married with 1 Corinthians 7? I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than it is to burn with passion. So if we have a guy that's not burning with passion at that exact moment, there's no woman in his life that he can't control himself with, nothing like that. How do we lead him?
First question with that, do you guys take that burn with passion, better than to let them burn with passion, to be here's a bunch of guys who are addicted to porn, but they don't have a girl in their life? Is that burning for passion for porn the same thing as burning for passion for an actual woman in your life?
Even if you have a woman in your life, you're still going to have that burn for porn. So I couldn't see how it would be pointing to that.
Right. So we're talking about a difference. You would say that the passage right there is not necessarily referencing a guy who says, well, I'm addicted to porn, therefore 1 Corinthians 7 means I have to get married.
Absolutely not.
Right. First thing I point to is the exact same thing. Getting married, most guys who struggled with porn before marriage will continue struggling with porn after marriage. I have met very few, maybe even no guys who break that mold. And so if marriage is not the solution to porn, I don't think that that's going to cure the sin problem. I think what he's saying is, hey, if you're going to have sex, at least do it in a legitimate context where it's not going to be considered sinful. So he's speaking in reference to people who are physically guy and girl together. Hey, we can't keep our hands off each other, so let's go ahead and get married.
So how do we reconcile that with single guys that are coming to us and saying, how do I get a girlfriend?
Well, I actually am going to take the opposite point on what you guys were saying, so we'd have to rewind for a second. Something that I frequently see. So you were saying that it's the burning for passion for porn. What I usually see is there's a couple of guys that I converse with on Disciple Cord, and it's not that they're burning for passion in a lustful way, but there's a sense of loneliness that is so profound, and it's getting in their way of being effective in other ways. So it's almost like a wound that they need to take care of before they can start doing the appropriate stuff.
That scenario is having your loneliness filled with a human wife going to solve the problem as compared to learning how to deal with it and have your loneliness filled with Christ instead.
It's going to solve your problem in the same way porn solves your problem of being horny.
Well, I would agree in that terms. I don't know if you can argue somebody who is like that out of having those feelings.
So you're just perpetually predisposed to be blue-pilled until they finally get married, and then they realize, oh crap, even now that I'm married, I realize it's still not fixing my problem. And only then do they have a chance.
I would say that there's probably a good group of guys that's probably the case.
So they're so steeped in blue pill culture that they can't escape that ideology without first realizing how futile it is.
Wieners talk pretty loud, man. Wieners talk pretty loud. I think if I'm talking about giving advice to these people, I have to be realistic to the fact that me saying, well, you can just be satisfied in Christ, while that is true, it's like saying that 26-year-olds or 25-year-olds are just going to wear what they're going to wear.
I got to disagree with your disagreement here. And in the same way that looking at porn doesn't solve your problem of being horny or wanting to have sex, getting married doesn't solve anybody's problem of being lonely. These guys need to be on their mission. I would say that's their problem. If they're so focused on women that they're not looking at their mission or actively trying to accomplish it, I don't want that guy to get married. I want him to find his mission and start really grinding on that. And then he'll find a wife, maybe not, that can help him with that mission.
Right. I guess at that point, I would say is you take a guy who is single and has a desire for a wife and convince him to pursue his mission beyond that. And I will take a guy who wants to get married, get him married and then get him on his mission, and we'll figure out which one gets there first.
Paul also said it's better not to be married because people that are married are focused on worldly things, pleasing their spouse.
I don't disagree with you.
I'll one up you, Prax. I've done it. I've done it both ways a number of times.
Which way is faster?
The single guy every time.
Okay. I'll trust your judgment on it, but I won't be surprised if you're wrong.
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of experience discipling both single and married men. And I will say the married men that I disciple most of the time initially, not in the long term, but at least initially, is dealing with marital issues. It's always, well, my wife did this. My wife says that. How do I deal with this with my wife? And, oh, we're having trouble with our sex life here, or she nags too much there. And it takes a lot longer to get him out of his wife's frame than it does for a guy who doesn't have a wife to be in her frame in the first place. And so, yes, he's in the frame generally to start with of women in general, because he has these ideologies of marriage and what it will look like. But especially if you can get him connected with a community of men who can affirm to him, look, marriage is not the solution to your problem. Christ and the mission he's called you to is the solution. And you can get married as soon as you have something of value to contribute and need help doing that, then you're in a much better shape. And those guys, yeah, it still takes time. It's not easy, but I find it far easier to accomplish than not.
Okay, to sum up the question for both of you, do you think it's right to point these single men into ways to get married, into, hey, this is how you get a girlfriend, or should we be having them focus more on their mission and say women come later?
So in that context, I'd say if you can get a guy to learn lessons from other married men, to be able to say, hey, guy, I've been there. I've seen what life is like single. I've seen what it's like married. I'm going to tell you, these are the things that you can see in married life that actually hold value and will help you understand the mission of making disciples. For that guy who can hear that and receive it from other married men, he would be better off to stay single.
Prex?
I want to clarify one thing. Again, I'm not advocating for it. My bigger point is if you have a guy who is so distracted by his all of these things, like, oh, if I just had a wife to have sex with her, if I had a wife and I wouldn't feel lonely anymore. You try to give them advice or you try to direct them in some way, and they just say, well, no, it's because I don't have a wife. And it's such a big obstacle, and it's such a big thing that they can just lynch their, or it's like their little secret ploy. Like, you can't get past them. It's, if I'm talking to a guy who says, well, you just don't understand it because you don't have kids. And it's like, dude, it's because you suck in general. That's why your life is in shambles. It's not because you have 2 kids.
There is a wide sphere of men who have the problems that you're talking about, but not necessarily as wide of a sphere. I would say it's a much smaller pocket of people who are so heavily rooted in their blue pill ideologies that they just cannot escape it. And they're stuck on, I just got to get married. I just got to get married. Are you judging the whole community by that small subset of people who you happen to run into more often than not? Because heck, that's what the internet's there for, right? Or are you looking at it from not an internet perspective that is great at collecting angry incels, but instead from a real life perspective of the normal person who, well, maybe beginning with these ideologies is far more amenable toward motion than somebody on the internet might be?
I'm trying to look at it from both. And even when I think about the thing that Paul says about it's better to not be married, it's better to not be married for what? And if it takes me getting someone married for them to become an effective discipler, at that point, it's their problem. It's their agency. I mean, there's going to be some problems that they run into for being married. That's their ends. My ends is to make them an effective discipler.
I think my answer boils it down more than your guys's, and it's, if a guy is girl crazy, he's not on his mission, and likely he's probably not doing as much as he can to be attractive. So he's not lifting weights. He's not on it. If he was on it, girls wouldn't be the problem. So I asked this question to Oz last time we did a podcast, and I'm curious what your answer is too. Drinking within church, yes or no? Or just, are Christians able to drink according to the Bible?
There's nothing unbiblical about drinking. Jesus drank wine. He turned water into wine for people, not just general wine, but the good stuff after they'd already been drinking for days. So I would say, yeah, there's nothing wrong with drinking itself. Getting drunk, and I say this as one, I have never been drunk in my life. Getting drunk, I would definitely draw a hard line on that. Yeah, don't do that. But drinking itself, no problems.
Okay, Prax, I'm going to start with you. How about cursing? Do you think it's okay for Christians to say ass? Words on that level.
So I'm probably the furthest on the side of it's okay, but it's very situational when it's okay. in the same way that the word itself is only filthy contextually. For a doctor to say the word scrotum and for my grandmother-in-law to say the word scrotum, it's contextually different.
So in what context is it okay?
If you are around other Christians who are totally unperturbed or it doesn't bother them and they understand that it is not a representation of how you actually feel, if they can see that it is a layered situation, then it is okay. However, by and large, most people are far too autistic to recognize that. So you're better off not swearing.
So to preface this, I have never sworn in my life to my recollection, but I still don't think it's sin. I think there's a lot of freedom in that. And so for me, it was more just cultural. That's how I was raised. Not that I necessarily would be sinful for me to do so. That being said, I think we need to preface all of these "is this sin, is that sin" questions with the idea of the balance in Romans. There's a user on one of the mods on True Christian, RUIZBUJC, has a post on their sidebar where he specifically addresses "is this sin, is that sin." You know, I know the guy quite well, and I would 100% subscribe to that view, which is that under Romans 14, Paul says point blank, nothing is inherently unclean in itself. Rather, if anybody deems it unclean in their heart, then for him it is sin. So there's this sense that nothing is inherently inherently sinful, right? And so I always love using the example of Prax. Is watching child pornography sin or not sin?
Sin. Well, no, not sin. Because if he was in the FBI and that was his
Right.
job, was to find people that were being trafficked, it wouldn't be sin.
That's the exact example that's used. If you say, well, watching child porn, that's definitely sin, but yet the reason you're watching it is because you're trying to track down the murderer, and there are clues in the video that help you, or not murderer, sorry, the offender, that help you track him down so that you can protect other children from being victimized by him. Is that really sinful at that point? It's a trick question. It might be, because we're only looking at that point at Romans 14:14. If you switch over to Romans 14:23 and see, oh, but anything that is not produced by faith is sin. Well, if he's doing it to get ahead in his career, well, yeah, it's still sin. But if he's doing it because, my goodness, he's got the Holy Spirit in his heart and he wants to protect those children, and as part of his ministry to the world, he's going to stifle evil and spread the gospel to the families of the victims by his ministry of protecting those kids. Well, now all of a sudden he's doing it because his faith compels him. So now it's not sin. So we can't impute our own morality on certain judgmental acts. So any question of is this sin, is this not sin, would apply in that context of, is swearing sin, is swearing not sin? Well, maybe. There's nothing inherently unclean about it, but are you doing it in a way that is building up the body? And are you doing it because your faith compels you to? And so Prax, I know you have a fantastic way of using very harsh, biting language to get guys to get off their butts and start doing things. And that builds up the kingdom. That's produced by faith. That's valuable. But if you're out there cussing nonchalantly just because you like using dirty words and there's nothing faith-driven about it, well, then yeah, that's sin. In fact, saying the phrase, "I love God," in a nonchalant, non-faith-produced way is just as much sin as cursing would be.
So when it comes to RPC, we do encourage guys to partake in the MFEE, male-female energy exchange. Is that something that we can be doing? Not necessarily from the Bible, but from a witness standpoint. Should a guy that's discipling people and people are looking up to be flirting with the girls? Should his mayor game include, talking to that cute 24-year-old girl?
It better. I recently talked to a couple people about this. Guys that I see struggle. So a big one recently, this whole Ravi Zacharias thing. Guy died, came out that he's screwing around with his staff. What I see is as these blue-pilled guys, they get into a position of authority, and because they've never really taken control of their body or their health, they're not socially attractive, they're just intellectually important in a certain community. All of a sudden they get put into this situation where they can use their power to kind of take advantage of someone, basically. And what I see generally is because these blue-pilled guys have so little of that male-female dynamic going on, that it predatorizes them. It turns the omnivore into a carnivore, and it turns somebody who if they had like a general, I'm going to reference another post. Is it sex starved or is it sex addicted? Is it female attention starved or is it addicted? And a guy that has an adequate amount of female attention, he can interact with them in a meaningful way that is beneficial for both of them, then a lot of the negative qualities don't ever rear their head.
Right. So I would completely agree with that. Just to refine this a little bit, what do you value more, or what is something that you will push and seek after more? A rare resource or something that's abundant?
Rare resource.
Right.
Right. And so if you, for example, are a baseball card fanatic and you see an autographed Mickey Mantle rookie card, what are you going to jump through, and what boundaries are you going to compromise in your life to get that card? But if you see a generic card from a current player that's not signed, that you could just go pick up at the local store for 50 cents, are you going to compromise your boundaries to go get that card? No. Right. So at some point, the more abundance you have, the more capable you are of controlling within that framework. And so if a guy who is married has no abundance in his life and he is starved for female attention and he's struggling and not having much sex with his wife, a guy like Andy Stanley will come out and say, you need to set such high boundaries that even if you fail, you will still maintain, you know, a sinless lifestyle, which is a very mistaken view of sin in the first place. But even if we take that framework, what you're really saying is, look, guy, I'm going to put you in a spot where I know you're starving for sex. I know that, you know, you're not fully satisfied by your wife right now. And so you might be tempted to look elsewhere, but female attention is so scarce to you right now that any female attention is going to trigger you into sin. And therefore you have to draw away from female attention as much as humanly possible. And so he tells this story where he was going to a conference. He flies out, and from the airport, they send a limo to get him and take him back. Or maybe it's not a limo, it might have been a taxi, I don't know. But they sent a car to go get him and take him back to the conference. And it was a woman driver, even covered by this piece of glass, I assume. Right? And he says, nope. I made them wait for me. I sent that driver back. They had to send a new driver who was a man. So that way I was not alone in a car with a woman. That to me is just absurd. And if you are so starved for female attention that being chauffeured by a woman in a car who is like not even sitting next to you and who you probably can't even see her face except maybe her eyes in the mirror, that's a problem. But if a guy is engaging in male-female energy exchange enough to a point where he's like, hey, this is commonplace. It's not a big deal. I see women all the time. They talk to me all the time. I talk to them all the time. It's cool. It's fun. Then the temptation is gone, right? Mm-hmm. Because at that point, it's normalized for you. It's not a temptation anymore, because instead of it being this scarce thing that you prize and you just look for and you value all the time, now it's just a commonplace thing and you move on.
Right.
I think we're all in agreement on this. I only wonder if he'd be able to send back a male driver to get a female one.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line in all this is just simply put, the more abundance you have, the better control you will have over your own life.
Within RPC, and especially within Disciple Cord, we get these guys that come in, they read a couple of things on the sidebar, and they immediately think they're an authority. Or they might have been there for a while, but they really haven't put the work in. They haven't put the rubber to the road, but since they know these terms, they're willing to raise their hand and say, I know what I'm talking about. We can call them LARPers. How should we deal with these guys? How should we say, hey, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no body of work. You're not even married. What are you talking about? Should we be talking to our brothers about these kind of things?
I was one of these guys. So when I first got into MRP and I was reading, I mean, I told you guys at the beginning of this recording how much I was reading. And I felt like, because I read it, and to a large degree, before even discovering the red pill, had already started implementing many of these things just from reading scripture alone. So I wouldn't say it was all within the first 2-3 months. There was definitely a precursor that laid the foundation. But when I started reading these books that connected the dots of why what I was doing was working, I felt like, hey, I'm already a master at this, and I figured this out before even reading these books. And it connected the dots in weird ways that eventually I saw myself immediately as this guru. And with the first couple posts that I had on MRP, there was a lot of really good reception to it. And so it fed my ego, making me think I was more masterful than I was. When in reality, I had properly intellectualized things and saw those early gains before truly transforming from it. So at that point, I was the guy who knew it and applied it, but I wasn't it yet. Right. And so I always talk about on Disciple Cord, it's not enough to just repent in your behaviors by changing your physical activities. It's not enough that you just believe the right things or change your mind and say, oh, I see it as sin now, or even to put those two together. Right. When I was sharing my testimony not too long ago, I was explaining how I knew the gospel. I read the Bible inside and out. I was a master at theology, apologetics, you name it. Intellectually, I was able to put things together better than most pastors, and I was told even beyond many seminary professors in my high school days. And beyond that, I was applying it. I was actively sharing the gospel. I was inviting people to youth group, and the whole thing was exploding. I was reading the Bible every day, praying consistently. I was fellowshipping with other believers. And so intellectually I had it, behaviorally I had it, but I wasn't even a Christian in those days. And I didn't realize that until later in my life. And I think the same thing applies to the red pill, where there are guys who can get it intellectually and they can emulate the behaviors, but they themselves are not transformed in new creations. They themselves have not figured out how to make it a part of who you are. It is all just role playing. And those guys absolutely need to be put in their place until the transformation becomes genuine.
Great answer. All right, Prax, in your opinion, what should we do about LARPers?
So the big ones that I see is, it's something that I think a lot about, and I get borderline break frame on this sometimes. I think it comes back to our conversation that we had with Oz last week. I recognize that there are going to be times where there are people that, in order for me to help build them up, they are so strongly standing in front of their old decrepit building. If I have to come from behind them with a wrecking ball, I might. And I've reconciled the fact that that tends to not make people like me very much. And that's fine by me. And that doesn't bug me. With a real LARPer, with somebody who is, they're obviously delusional. They're not congruent with the fact that, or they're not congruent. They have these things where they're like, well, no, I'm doing everything right. But then they have these like special little things that they're like, but my wife is a unicorn. It's just it's incongruent. And I will call those out day and night. I'm fine with that.
For me, it plays back into the too many chiefs, not enough Indians. And for RPC, the way guys can gain rapport is by posting. You answer OISs, and sometimes you're mean. And it's easy to think, okay, if I want to gain rapport in RPC, all I need to do is be mean to people, or all I need to do is write this many posts. Like RC said, it's not that. You have to actually internalize these things. You have to be changed by them. And it's hard and it takes time, but it's worth it.
So the question at that point, which I don't want to answer in this conversation, maybe it's a teaser for another conversation, is when you find a LARPer like that, what is the proper way to put him in his place and to be able to communicate to get an active change out of him?
Yeah, we'll
that's
talk
where my
about
life
that.
has lived.
All right, well, thank you guys for listening to another RPC podcast. Hopefully you guys learned something from me or from Red Curious. That's pretty much it. So just like let us know down in the comments what you guys think. Like and subscribe so that we can get more people watching this stuff. Thank you so much.
See you guys.